In business this week, three things to know. First, a summer rebound for the U.S. economy. The gross domestic product is now estimated to increase nearly 5%. Then, from Russia, with no love at the United Nations, Russia warns the U.S. and Europe it will not back down in the face of sanctions. And blowing the whistle on corporate wrongdoing, the U.S. wants increased incentives for whistleblowers and will meet one man who actually did it. Arise Xchange starts now.
Remain seated while we greet the President.
In business this week, three things to know. First, a summer rebound for the U.S. economy. The gross domestic product is now estimated to increase nearly 5%. Then, from Russia, with no love at the United Nations, Russia warns the U.S. and Europe it will not back down in the face of sanctions. And blowing the whistle on corporate wrongdoing, the U.S. wants increased incentives for whistleblowers and will meet one man who actually did it. Arise Xchange starts now. Hello, everyone. I'm Andrew Schmertz, and welcome to Weekend Exchange. What a difference a quarter makes following a disastrous winter when the economy actually shrank. The government says we turned things around in the second quarter by a lot. The Commerce Department has revised the Q2 gross domestic product up to 4.6%. That is its final reading of the second quarter GDP. The 4.6% represents the fastest growth in 2 years. Personal consumption and business investment help lead the way up. And consumers are feeling pretty good about the economy right now. Consumer sentiment in September came in at its strongest number in a year. The Thomson Reuters University of Michigan Index rose to 84.6. The number is key because consumer spending makes up 60% of the U.S. economy. And those numbers were welcomed on Wall Street on Friday. Let's take a look at the final numbers. The Dow Jones Industrial Average up 167 points to 17,113. Boy, we have seen a whipsaw of numbers this whole week on the markets. The S&P 500 up 16 and the NASDAQ up 45 for the week. However, the markets finished all in the red. The Dow down, S&P 500 down, and the NASDAQ down by almost 1.5%. Some of the top stocks making news today. Chiquita has renegotiated its purchase of Irish banana producer Fifey's to block out competing offers. Under the deal, Chiquita will own 59.6% of the new company, while Fifey's will retain control of 40.4%. The combined firm is estimated at about $1.6 billion. Chiquita closing up 34 cents. BlackBerry reported a quarterly loss smaller than analysts expected. However, revenue of $916 million fell short of expectations. BlackBerry has also secured 200,000 orders of its new Passport device. BlackBerry is still trying to turn things around, up 46 cents to 10.26. And Intel is investing up to $1.5 billion in Chinese computer chip maker Tsinghua Unigroup. Intel will purchase about 20% of the low-cost chip producer as competition in Silicon Valley heats up. Intel up 12 cents. And taking a look at commodities, gold back, and oil up 91 cents to 93.44 a barrel. On Friday, Russia issued its strongest warning about sanctions, saying the country will not succumb to U.S. and European pressure involving its actions in Ukraine. Russia's foreign minister spoke this afternoon in New York, and our UN senior correspondent Frank Ucciardo is here with more of what he had to say. A very interesting press conference, Frank.
Yeah, you know, he almost really turned aside that whole issue of the threats. He was asked about retaliation against Ukraine and the EU, and he said, look, we want to maintain our business ties with the Ukraine, which is very interesting. And he also said that, you know, he kind of left the door open saying, you know, we want to do business, but there are certain things that we are not going to back down on.
And he did take a pretty hard line, though, on some specific points.
Yeah, indeed he did. You know, he said that the whole NATO issue in Ukraine reflects a Cold War mentality. He claims that basically NATO is trying to expand across Europe, grow bigger. He sees that the pact that Ukraine wants to do with NATO is a direct threat to Russia, and he says that is a very dangerous thing. He says it could destabilize the entire region.
It is kind of interesting. NATO has sort of not pursued Ukraine too much on having them inside the alliance specifically. There is a lot more that he talked about as well, and specifically with Iran, for example, the six-party talks with Iran. And we heard the Iranian president on recently saying, and he was interviewed by Charlie Rose, and he said that that the U.S. is basically unreasonable on this point. Where does Russia see these talks going?
Interesting you say that, because Russia sees it the other way. Yeah. He is cautiously optimistic, and that is something that was also mentioned by the Germans as them being optimistic about the talks, saying that they're pretty close. And that's something that Lavrov said today. He thinks they're very close, and he says they have until around Thanksgiving time, around November 24th, which is the deadline that has been set for these talks, that is going to basically try to curb Iran's nuclear ambitions. So he was very optimistic.
We were talking about this in the newsroom. He speaks fluent English.
Yes,
and
he does.
Kind of noted that he refused to talk English today. Read anything into this?
Well, he's an old UN hand. He was the ambassador there for a number of years. We all know him quite well. He speaks English better than some Americans do.
And better than his interpreter, apparently.
Yeah, you know, he had two interpreters. He kept tossing back and forth between a lady and a man, and they were very hard to understand. And no, we were surprised that he wouldn't answer any questions in English. He stuck strictly to Russian for the entire press conference.
And what do we expect from the United Nations next week? Because we still have another few days of this to go on.
Well, basically, you know, a lot of eyes right now are focused on the six-party talks. They want to see an outcome before the general debate is over. That's the middle of next week. And we still have to hear from a number of African nations that are coming up. So as far as the heavy hitters, they're going to be leaving New York this weekend, and a lot of it's going to be winding down by the middle of next week.
But a lot of what actually happens when it comes to real work, though, kind of happens when the big names go home, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, as you probably have heard, a lot of the preliminary negotiations start in what is called the margins. Well, okay, while there are speeches going on, there are these private meeting rooms around the General Assembly where President Obama went, and he would meet with one delegation's head, and then maybe the foreign ministers would get together at another table. So all these negotiations that really mean something don't occur in the General Assembly, don't occur in the Security Council, they occur behind closed doors.
Okay, Frank Ucciardo, thank you so much. Talk to you next week. While there's been a lot of diplomatic back and forth this week at the UN General Assembly, there's also business getting done, especially for U.S. companies that work in Africa. Stephen Hayes is the CEO of the Corporate Council on Africa, the largest association of U.S. businesses that invest in Africa. He has been hosting a series of high-level dinners with African leaders and joins us now. Stephen, welcome to Arise Xchange. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's good to be back.
What have you been hearing from these leaders that maybe, you know, has been a little bit different in the past, if anything?
Well, I think that there's not a lot of difference, but I think the nuances are important. Some of the nuances are more awareness that if you're going to have new investment in it, there is going to have to be an adjustment. There's going to have to be greater transparency. And I think another issue is that there's a stronger now look at the possibility of regional markets or a genuine regionalization in Africa, particularly in East Africa.
Do you think we'll start seeing more and more trade deals along the lines of the European Union then? They've been talking about that for some time.
I think, yes, they have been talking about it for some time. I think that the emphasis will be more trade blocks, whether in fact that some countries or some leaders are willing to let loose of some power. It remains to be seen, but I think that there is a growing awareness that regional blocks are going to be necessary for improved trade relations, particularly with the U.S. and Europe.
Do you see increased competition among the African countries in pursuing specific industries, or are they working together?
I don't think, despite rhetoric, I don't think that the African countries are really working well together yet. Certainly there's an emphasis on it at the African Union. In some ways they are, but in terms of economic issues, I don't see the cooperation there yet that needs to develop.
And you know, we always talk on this show about the need to improve infrastructure, electricity, roads, et cetera, because you can't really have investments until that is in place. You're heading up a conference, I believe, next month. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, sure, thank you. The major U.S.-Africa meeting on infrastructure has been our conference every 2 years, so it's coming up in coordination with the World Bank meetings. We expect 300 or 400 people there to really look at infrastructure deals. What that conference provides really is, especially for American companies, the opportunity to look at what deals are available and really start to make the connection, particularly with the ministers of finance, which are critical to new business, as well as the ministers of trade.
Okay, Stephen, we'd love to have you on, or somebody from the organization, when you have that conference. Fascinating topic. Thank you for coming in today.
Thank you.
Coming up, blow the whistle and rake in millions. We'll meet one whistleblower who turned down cash so he can talk about financial wrongdoing, and you are going to want to hear what he has to say here on Arise Exchange. Global. It's Monday, so it must be time for a new round of sanctions against Russia. Nigeria is open for business, and you are getting a handle on this situation. Compelling. Time for liquid lunch, things that make us want to drink. Could she have been separated at birth from, say, Grimace? All business.
Money's coming out of these countries, and that flow is part of what's driving the equity markets.
Entertaining money daily.
It's about reimagining.
Arise Exchange.
I think media and reporters have a lot to answer for.
AIDS, hunger, people not having running water, the things that we just take for granted.
I think the most important issues in the world today are education and poverty.
Terrorism and war, I guess, is always. It's always an issue, and you know, the quality of life of certain groups of people in certain areas.
I think inequality.
Arise News, every culture, every angle.
Welcome back to Arise Exchange. Some of the top stories making headlines across the nation and the world this afternoon. The FAA has resumed flights at a reduced rate at Chicago's O'Hare Airport after a Friday morning fire. The FAA grounded 1,600 flights nationwide after a fire was deliberately set at one of O'Hare's radar facilities, leaving thousands of passengers stranded on the tarmac and flights tied up nationwide. Authorities report the fire was started as part of a suicide attempt by a former airport employee. You can now find a gas station selling gas below $3 in 28 states. Now, how easy that is depends on exactly where you are, of course. For instance, 30% of Mississippi gas stations have prices starting with a 2 at the front of the number. Overall, prices are that low in just 4% of stations across the country, but we have seen gas prices come down. Bill Gross has found a new fund. The controversial fund manager is leaving PIMCO for Janus Capital, and shares of Janus were up substantially on the news, trading up 30% during the day. Gross revealed plans to leave PIMCO last week after news broke that the SEC was investigating the firm. As for PIMCO, there are reports that Gross was about to be fired. Drones getting the all clear in Hollywood. The FAA has opened the way for 6 production companies to use unmanned aircraft systems as part of the filming. The groups appeal the FAA's ban on using drones for commercial purposes. A statement from the FAA says this is the first step in allowing the film and television industry to use the technology. Look overhead. And a pipeline full of liquid gold. No, it's not oil. It's actually beer. A 500-year-old Belgium brewery called De Hafman plans to bridge the gap between its brewing and bottling that happens in different parts of a town by building an underground pipeline to pump the beer. The City Council approved the plan, which will reduce traffic and carbon emissions. What they did not say is they just want their beer faster. Along with world leaders meeting for the UN, New York City also hosted the Clinton Global Initiative's annual meeting this week. Former U.S. President Bill Clinton rallied world leaders to provide relief to those struggling in the developing world. Ulrick Gaillard is the president of the Bate Relief Alliance and was at the initiative and joins us now. Ulrick, thank you for coming to Arise Exchange.
Well, thank you for having me.
What was it like to be at the Clinton Global Initiative? What did you get out of it?
Well, it's a very interesting and very powerful network where actually we have world leaders and presidents, kings and queens coming together to address pressing issues affecting the world. And for us, as a member of the CGI, is an opportunity also for us to network and to create new partnerships to address certain issues that affect the countries that we work in, for example, Haiti, Dominican Republic, and Peru.
And what is the challenges sort of facing the Caribbean nations? And has Haiti, for example, come back from a devastating earthquake about 4 years ago now?
Well, actually, the country is trying very hard to come back on its 2 feet. It has made it has actually reached out to the international community to help it develop its tourism. And right now, but there's a big challenge. The infrastructures are not there yet. Roads, bridges, hospitals. And the Prime Minister was talking at CGI meeting a couple of days ago, and he acknowledged that the country has a lot to do to reach the point that it wants to reach. And right now, it doesn't want the country to keep receiving humanitarian aid, but investments.
Yeah, well, let's talk about that a little bit. What are some of the challenges to making investments in many of these countries right now?
Well, actually, in Haiti, one of the major obstacles, actually, is land ownership. Actually, the country has very, very old laws that make it very difficult for investors to acquire land.
And what, foreign ownership, for example, is limited?
Yes, indeed. From what I know, if you're not a Haitian citizen, you cannot purchase land. You can only rent or lease for a number of years.
Okay, so let's talk about your organization a little bit and how you're going in there and sort of tackling the various challenges that need tackling.
We started to work in the Dominican Republic in 1997 because there's for us, a very serious crisis inside of the sugarcane plantations where thousands of Haitian migrant workers work and their families with very little access to services. And after working in the Dominican Republic, and in 2010, after the earthquake struck Haiti, we had a natural necessity, really, to go there. So we reached out to our partners, mainly USAID, to develop a women empowerment program at the border, southeast border, where we provide them with microcredits. And
we're seeing more of that, by the way. It's really interesting, and this is targeted towards women.
Towards women. And at CGI, we are focusing a lot on women and children because we believe that providing economic power to women, it will change communities. So that's what we did in Haiti in 2010. Now we are working in Peru right now, where we are involving a maternal child health program, servicing 2,000 children and 450 pregnant women. Now the Ministry of Health has asked us to expand that program into the
no, sorry to interrupt you. When it comes to entrepreneurship, what are sort of the incentives and sort of the programs that need to be in place? Because I would imagine many of these countries are still very tourism-based, and developing sort of internal industry is a little bit challenging. So, you mentioned, for example, the program with women. What are the other programs that need to be done, both externally but also for the governments to do?
Well, the government needs to provide incentives for the small businesses to take place. For example, Haiti is a very poor country. Without access to cash and loans to those small business men and women, and they will never be able to get to where they want to get at. For example, when we did our program in 2010, what we did, we partnered with a local financing company called Francoze to provide them with small microloans. It had a lot to do with just giving the trust that they require.
But it's not just money, right? There's education component.
Education,
Isn't there sort of a spirit that you have to infuse in them, say you can go ahead and do this and we will support you in helping to do that?
Well, we had to provide them with 2 years of education about how to use finances, banking, loans, and repayment. So all these things had to be taught to them, in order for them to understand how to use the money and how to use it wisely.
Okay. And so what are sort of the next steps? What impact are you seeing already on the ground from these efforts?
Again, Haiti has a long way to go, really. Right now,
Part of the problem in Haiti is, and I've spoken to people, a lot of people there trying to do business, is the infrastructure and the roads are so bad. I mean, you can't get around. The utility issue is terrible.
Absolutely correct. The government acknowledged that a couple of days ago at the meeting. It says that they want to invest in infrastructures. For example, not long ago, they have let go of their current energy czar. As I said, they want to bring intelligent folks on the ground to work with them. To me, I think what needs to be done is a massive investment in infrastructures. Without that, you cannot attract tourists at all. Because if I'm going to go over there, I want to make sure if I get sick and I know where I'm going to go.
Someone's going to take you.
Absolutely correct.
Okay. Ulrick, how can people reach you quickly if they're interested?
www.batteryrelief.org.
Okay. Ulrick, thank you so much for coming on.
It's a pleasure.
Fascinating topic. We'll have you back on soon.
Thank you.
Okay. Coming up, the gun control activist who is packing at a local school. He is our favorite person of the day. You're watching Arise Exchange.
The great thing about Arise Entertainment 360 is that we cover the 360 of entertainment, food, fashion, lifestyle, culture. We're able to cover it all. And the thing I love most about the show is we're able to do a stunning combination of high and low. So we can talk about Rihanna on the red carpet, but we can also speak about high art with people like Sanford Biggers and Hank Willis. We actually spend quality time with our guests and we really get to know them. It's really intriguing because we get a 360 look at our guests.
I think media and reporters have a lot to answer for.
AIDS, hunger, people not having running water, the things that we just take for granted.
I think the most important issues in the world today are education and poverty.
Terrorism and war, I guess, is always. It's always an issue, and the quality of life of certain groups of people in certain areas.
I think inequality.
Arise News, every culture, every angle.
Time now for our favorite person of the day when we pick one person who grabbed our attention, and not for the right reasons. It helps to practice what you preach, and a gun control activist in Buffalo found that out the hard way. Dwayne Ferguson, who is the leader of a local chapter of the anti-gun violence group Mad Dads, has pleaded guilty to causing a lockdown at an elementary school. How did he do that? Well, he brought his gun to the school. Ferguson, who is also a volunteer with the group Peacemakers, has admitted to carrying the loaded handgun into the school, says it was an accident and didn't even remember he had it on him when confronted by police. His actions caused the Harvey Austin Elementary School to be locked down for hours back in February. Ferguson was sentenced to probation and community service. He's also been booted from all after-school programs, get this, including the anti-violence program he ran. Prosecutors agreed to let him plead to a misdemeanor after it was determined that the gun control advocate, in fact, had a valid gun permit. And so Dwayne Ferguson is our favorite person of the day. Coming up next, our corner office and some beer for us to drink because, as you know, it is 5 o'clock somewhere. You're watching Arise Exchange. Thank you.
Arise News is a different kind of network. We are able to tell our own stories, and we're able to cover stories in a way that other media outlets don't do. We've got world-class journalists, veteran journalists who have been in this industry for decades, not just in front of the camera, but behind the scenes as well. Arise News is a place where we can tell stories in an interesting, factual, inclusive way like no one else in the business can.
I think that people in America do care about what happens throughout the world.
Global warming is probably something that has to be addressed sooner rather than later.
From Somalia and the genocide there, and that's something people don't know about. They have no idea the brevity of that situation.
The first thing I think about when I think of Africa is like war and famine and disease.
And right now with the tsunami that happened or the earthquakes in, Japan, we always look out for other people.
Arise News, every culture, every angle.
Last week on Arise Xchange, will Janet Yellen's spring get any surprises on the markets when it comes to interest rates?
The market is worried that if they raised rates too soon, you might kill the recovery.
President Obama pledged to send 3,000 troops to West Africa to fight Ebola. Kanye West demanded all the fans attending a concert in Sydney stand.
I can't do the rest of the show until everybody stand up.
One was in a wheelchair. The other had a prosthetic leg. Watch this week for more. Arise Xchange. Welcome back to Arise Xchange. We were originally scheduled to bring you an inside perspective of the world of whistleblowers. We're going to try to bring that to you next week. What's brewing uptown in New York? Our next guest, in fact, says it's his brewery. Dyckman Beer mixes his Dominican heritage with a New York City flavor to reach what he says is an untapped drinking demographic. Here in our corner office today is Juan Camilo, founder and president of Dyckman Beer. Juan, welcome to Arise Xchange. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
You know, it's interesting. You say this is for a specific type of people, for you're trying to reach Hispanics. Explain how you do that, and why do you think there's a different drinking taste?
Sure. Well, definitely the first thing we need to know is that the beer is for everybody. I just have a special demographic that I am catering to, and I think there's an opportunity there. So I think we're reaching them basically with the fruits that we're using, the flavors, the different styles of beer that are just more catered to somebody that may like a lighter beer and just more flavorful.
Is this from your Dominican heritage?
That's correct. So all the ingredients are inspired by my Dominican heritage, but it's definitely a company that represents Northern Manhattan first and foremost.
Okay, so how's your distribution going? Because starting a beer company, because I met the Brooklyn brewery folks when they were starting out, and I had a great time in Brooklyn. I was covering news in New York 1. I'd go there at 7 a.m. and then drink all day, basically right out of the tap. But what they said to me is that you sort of have to be in the trucking business.
That's correct. I mean, when I started my beer company, I very quickly realized that what I really had was a marketing and distribution company. We're self-distributing right now, and that's extremely, extremely tough. The great thing is that we are in New York, and it's a great city, and there's a lot of business.
So how do you go from do you go, I guess, from supermarket to supermarket and ask them to take it? And what's that conversation like?
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, I did this how I knew how to do it, which was simply being a door-to-door salesman. And, you really go there, you present yourself properly, you tell them that you have a great beer, they taste it, they judge for themselves, and not just that, let them know that you're going to be able to support them with marketing and sales as well.
Where are you actually brewing the beer?
Sure. So right now I'm contract brewing with a brewery in Connecticut, about an hour and a half away. And though it might not be made locally, it's actually very, very local compared to other big breweries that claim they're local.
Yeah, no, that's true. Now you're going up against obviously the giants, and those pay for supermarket shelf space often. So what kind of inroads are you making? It's not just supermarkets. Are you getting into restaurants, for example?
Correct. Well, one of the latest supermarket chains that I got into was Whole Foods. They're big on just.
Congratulations about that.
Thank you.
That's a big get.
Yeah, they're big on just having local brands, and they're big on catering to the hyper local crowd. So that's important as well. Just again, being a New York City brand, I think people are just more willing to give a new product a chance. They know that it's.
Let me ask you, though, there is sort of this dichotomy when it comes to craft beers. On one hand, you're saying, it's local, it's small, it's sort of handmade, if you will.
That's correct.
But on the other hand, as a businessman, you want to be as big as possible. So how do you balance those two?
Absolutely. I mean, after 1 year, right now we're in 80 bars and restaurants, 25 supermarkets, and I actually just launched a beer in Dominican Republic. So
you've taken this to Dominican?
That's correct. I was actually there 2 weeks ago, and so far we have 23 accounts. So it's very exciting. As small as we are, there's still a lot of potential for growth. It's really just about managing it and just making sure that, sales, distribution, and the right production is there to support the business.
On one hand, it's such a great city to start a business because it's so diverse and so big. On the other hand, it's so challenging. How have you found sort of your relationships with the government on this? Because there's a lot of regulations that oversee beer.
Correct. I mean, this is one of the hardest industries to start, and I did this all by myself and funded it all by myself. But really, at the end of the day, there wasn't an obstacle that I didn't let get in my way to start my business.
But you have to have that attitude, don't you? I mean,
yeah,
you're going to run into an obstacle every single day.
Many obstacles. I mean, clearly the federal and state government were one thing, but, once you launch the business, that's completely different. You have to deal with, as I like to say, the girl in the front, get past her to talk to the manager. Then you have to bring the product up to market. So it's challenging in very, very different levels, not just dealing with the beer companies, but the actual distributors themselves. But you have to keep going.
Can you make it with just one brand of beer, or are you going to have many more? I guess this is a Pilsner.
Yep, so this is actually my first brew. We're going to have more seasonals launching, but you need a diverse product set, and that's important, especially to my craft beer company, because I really want to display what the neighborhood has to offer, and my culture as well.
Okay. All right, thank you. And so right now, only you get it uptown or throughout the city?
No, throughout the city, all the way from Westchester County down to Brooklyn. And if you want to know more, I do have a beer finder at DeichmannBeerCo.com.
People can go in and kind of.
That's correct. You can find you.
And you have we have about 30 seconds left. Do you have a specific beer master, or are you the beer master?
So I am the brew master. I did hire one recently, which I'm very, very excited about, just to really get somebody that had the right proper training and can overlook the brewing operations, so I can really take care of the rest of the business as well.
Okay. Juan Camilo, thank you so much. It's called Deichmann Brew. We appreciate you coming in. We're going to try to sample the product in a few minutes, I think.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Hey, we have some very exciting news here on Arise. It's called Distribution. Arise Entertainment 360 will debut at 7 p.m. on Centric. That's BET's sister station. We're very excited for Shannon and Lola. It's a terrific program. I urge you to tune in. It's a lot of fun. Let's take a look at the markets once again for the week. Red arrows across the board, even though it finished strong on Friday. I'm Andrew Schmertz. Have a nice weekend, everybody. See you again live on Monday. This week, three things to know. First, a summer rebound for the U.S. economy. The gross domestic product is now estimated to increase